Okay, Trustee Church, I'm going to hit this gavel here in a moment. Just wanted to make very good. All right. All right, everyone, it is 11:08 a.m. and it is a special meeting of the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees on October 24th, 2023. And now I would like to invite Clerk Rodriguez for roll call.
Thank you, Madam President. Trustee Woodley.
Here.
Trustee Westlake.
Here.
President Smith.
Here.
I'm here. Vice President Nicolette.
Good morning.
Trustee Mayberry.
Here.
Trustee Church. Via Zoom.
By Zoom, here.
All right, Madam President, we have a quorum.
Wonderful. All right. So she is the woman of the 2 hours, maybe shorter, that will be here. We're here in focus and in celebration of the first year of our superintendent, Dr. Susan Enfield. Very much looking forward to this meeting and grateful for her. And it would be our honor if you could please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. And now we will do our land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in the hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We acknowledge that some of our educational structures are situated in the traditional homelands of the Washoe, Washoe, Numu, Northern Paiute, Niwi, Western Shoshone, Nuwu, Southern Paiute peoples. We pay respect to their elders past and present. These lands continue to be a gathering place for Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their deep connections to these places. We extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live and learn in their territory. Thank you. So that closes section 1, and now we will move on to section 2. We have one item for presentation, discussion, information, and/or action, and it is item 2.01. This is the presentation, discussion, and possible action to receive, amend, revise, and/or approve the final performance evaluation for the 2022-23 school year for the Washoe County School District Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Susan Enfield, including action statements related to the new strategic plan. This is an item for possible action, and I am very pleased to introduce a international expert in board governance and school district policy, and that is Dr. Thomas Alsbury from the Balanced Governance Solution, and he will be facilitating this meeting. So welcome, Dr. Alsbury. We're very honored to have you.
Thank you.
And so as we get started, I will turn this over to you. Dr. Alsbury is going to share with the community a brief recap of all the steps that brought us to this day, which reflects work that began over a year ago.
Well, thank you very much, and it's great to be back with you again. So you're all looking well. I just, as President Smith mentioned, I have had the opportunity to conduct school board research in the U.S., but in addition to that, we've done the only research internationally on school boards. So that's quite interesting, and I've had the opportunity just recently to work in Tunisia, which I just returned from, working with the U.S. Embassy school systems there, and that was a fascinating exercise. But I'm taking up your time, so I will stop there. That's a 12-member board, by the way. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. You'll stick with 7. Yeah. That's true. We're here. What we're here today, as President Smith mentioned, is the final, what is planned as the final step in the evaluation process of the superintendent. So the initial action that this board took over a year ago was to adopt a particular method of evaluating the superintendent. And that method has a series of steps in it. One of the initial sets of decisions that you made as a board occurred back in October 11th of 2022. And at that work session, which was a day-long work session, there were a series of decisions and actions and votes taken regarding the evaluation. One of those was to review your strategic goals that had been adopted for the year and to make a decision on which of those strategic goals you would focus in on to evaluate your superintendent on. And in the end, you selected 7 objectives from your strategic goals to focus in on. Okay, so from those, just as a reminder for anyone who's listening, who's not been on this the journey with us, you selected from 5 different goals from your strategic goals, and within those you selected either 1 or 2 objectives within each of those goals. So that's where we get to the 7 goals. In addition to that, the superintendent was asked to provide metrics, that is data metrics, that would be collected in order to support those strategic goals and objectives, and in order to share with you evidence so that you could better make decisions surrounding the evaluation. And so that data was presented to the board. It was initially, though, approved by the board, those data metrics. Now, in balanced governance, that is part of a very important step, and that is the belief that evaluation should not be subjective. There's always a bit of subjectivity in any evaluation, but it is unfair, in my opinion and in the opinion of research findings. We find that ineffective boards are noted for the subjectivity of their superintendent's evaluation. They base those decisions on no data, and usually there's no agreement on either side, either the board or the superintendent, on what is to be looked at, what is to be measured, and what data is to be used in that measurement. So you as a board made the decision to identify all of those things in advance. Okay. Now, we then went to the next step. So during the course of the year, of course, that data came into you as a board in a variety of ways. One of the ways that evidence came into you as a board is also part of the balanced governance process, which is to calendarize reports that would come to the board that were explicitly measuring progress on strategic goals. So those, you have an agendized item that's very specific to reports that show progress made on strategic goals. This becomes evidence for you for what will eventually be the evaluation in the end. So you didn't just receive evidence at the end of the evaluation process, but you were actually receiving evidence and data each time you had a meeting where one of those reports were brought forward. In that sense, the data pool I would call it more like a living document that's building on itself month by month as you go along. Now, finally, in the end, when we do get to the end, you received a summation of that data and some additional data that was presented to you from the superintendent's office, gathered information that would be helpful for you to make your decisions in the evaluation. Now, again, I know I'm sort of repeating myself, but there's a lot of steps in this, and so anybody who's listening, I want to be clear that remember that evidence, it is coming from the superintendent, but it was agreed upon by the board. So this was evidence that you said, this is what we want, please provide it to us, and the superintendent did that, So then we get to how do you create an evaluation, a single evaluation? Now, and what do I mean by that? Well, there are 7 board members, and it's just ineffective to give a superintendent 7 individual and separate evaluations. What we find, if that is done, you will have, in some cases, contradictory findings. One board member may think the superintendent is the greatest thing ever and gives very high marks, and another trustee may say, yeah, they did a good job, but I'm not going to give the super high marks. And there might even be a trustee that didn't think the superintendent did a fabulous job, but maybe there's some areas of growth. So there can be some slight differences in those evaluations individually. We never know, but we also want to value your individual voice. So in this process, it is designed intentionally so that you do have that voice. In other words, there are other evaluation techniques where you could all get into a room and we could lock the doors and you could just sort of hash it out verbally for a number of hours and try to come to some consensus on an evaluation. What we found, though, in our studies is that that's less effective, because what will happen with any group of humans is that you will have influence on each other that's sometimes connected to a lot of things that don't really have a lot to do with an evaluation. They might have to do with social ideas or the perception of who's more powerful or less powerful. There's always a pecking order in human groups that occurs. We know that, right? And so what this method attempts to do is to minimize that as much as possible by first having the trustees individually and privately make their own ratings and their own recommendations and their own recommendations for growth. And so without any influence from anyone else, they are able to do that. Those then individual reports come in to me, and this is the first opportunity that I have to see what these numbers look like. And so I wanted to mention a few things about those numbers. So as a professor of statistics, I am looking for what we call outliers. Now, we are going to take an average of those ratings, and so each one of these 7 areas of focus you rated, and let me mention that before I get too much further. The rating scale, which in the document goes like this. A rating scale of could be, you could have rated the superintendent, and thank you, it's on the screen, it's on the right-hand side. You'll see rating scale, and a trustee could have, for any of these 7, for each of these 7, they could have said that I think the superintendent is highly effective, developing, or ineffective. And there are numbers, as you can see, connected. It's not just 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are actual values that are connected to that selection. And so we can take and translate your rubric rating into a number and then average those 7 scores together and see, okay, this is what the rating. Now you can see on the first page that in this first objective, provide and continuously improve rigorous and relevant curriculum, instruction, and assessment, practice with a focus on academic recovery to increase learning outcomes for all students. That average came out to 2.71. Now in October, the board, we also discussed, this is was an important conversation, what should the rating scale be? How do you translate the number 2.71, that average, into a word? Because folks want a word. What does that mean? And so the box on the left upper side there on the screen is showing you the decision that you made as a board, and that was voted on what the rating number would be translated into. So if you take a look at that chart, you'll see that the number 2.71 falls in the developing area. Now, it can be beneficial, I think, because you can always add specificity to anything, right? And so one thing that's interesting about a 2.71, if you look at the scale, to get a 1.91 through to a 2.79 is the developing category. So a 2.71 is really close to the junction between developing and effective. So that's one additional thing that you should note. Okay, it's very close to being in the next category. The second thing that I want to say just in general, and I hope I don't get myself into trouble, you know how I can do that sometimes. In my work with districts on superintendent evaluations, I do have to say that this is it's a high standard. Many of these evaluation scales break at sort of the rounding point. So in other words, most of them would go up to 2.55. And so the idea is that if you get past 2.55, then generally we round up and we'll give you the effective, okay? That's most of the rating scales that I've worked with boards. That's how they function, okay? But that's okay. It just means that you at Washoe have set a high bar for your superintendent evaluation here. You can't get into the effective until you get to 2.8. So there it is. Now, so I want to go back to these numbers and just say a few more things. So when I'm looking at the numbers, each of the trustees, would have a rating 1, 2, 3, or 4 that they gave for this category. And so we have the average, 2.71. In addition to just doing a straight average, we want to look at the spread of those numbers. So in other words, in statistics, if a few board members were giving 4s, let's say, and then other board members were giving 1s, you could still see, even though the average may come out to developing, you could look at those numbers that could be, maybe that's 4, 4, 1, 1, and there's not a clear consensus is my point. You would say, okay, there's a split on this board, and the data potentially could be considered to have outlier. It's an outlier issue. When I'm teaching statistics class, the most common example of this, sorry, Beth didn't ask me to give you a statistics lesson, but the most common...
For the record, I think this is helpful everyone to understand, because our journalism partners asked me before, how did you arrive at these? And you're answering that right now. Okay, great.
So the most understandable example for a lot of folks is to think about housing prices. So if I am in a city and you say, how much does an average house cost in this city? Well, if most of your houses don't cost a whole lot, but you have one neighborhood where the houses cost, tens of millions of dollars, the truth is that of the 100 houses that are for sale, 90 of them cost $400,000 or $500,000 to buy, but the other 10 cost $30 million a piece to buy, and so the average house price now is bumped up artificially to $800,000 is the average price of a house. Well, that's not the average price of the house. It's statistics giving really a misleading conclusion. And so I looked at this data not only as a pure average, but also to see, was there too big of a spread in these ratings so that we had to engage in some other form of statistical adjustment. Now, in statistics, when you have ratings that are outliers, there's a couple of ways to deal with that. And one of them is a technique called Windsorizing, which I won't get into. But I'm going to stop there because, having said all of that, that conversation or that information I just shared with you was unnecessary for me to use. the fact is that the ratings were very consistent, that in each of these 7 areas, we did not have board members, here's a couple rating really high and a couple others rating really low. In addition to that, we did not have any of the trustees individually overinflating their ratings. That, in other words, there were no trustees that gave all 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, right? All the highest scores. And there were also no trustees that gave 1s all the way across the board either. In fact, as you looked at each trustee, there was a variety of ratings that every trustee gave. Okay? And so all of that is actually really good news in terms of your being confident about these numbers, okay? That they really do represent what the consensus of the board felt, okay? And there was neither overinflation or overly reducing of the average, okay? Good? Okay. So that was good. So now we get to the comments. So the trustees were asked to provide 2 different kinds of comments in this evaluation.
Dr. Ellsbury?
Yes.
Before we do that, would you mind explaining the methodology for the comments when we get to that portion in
Yes.
the review? Would that be okay? Just
Oh,
so everyone.
do you want to wait and just do the numbers first and then do that? Okay.
Yeah, that way when we get
Perfect.
to those sections, we can explain how did we arrive at these.
Okay.
Would that be okay with you?
That's perfectly
okay,
fine.
Wonderful. Thank
Absolutely.
You.
So let's just look at the rating numbers then. So we've already talked about the first one, objective 1.1 under academic growth. The next page of the evaluation draft is goal number 2, highly effective personnel. So under highly effective personnel, there were 2 objectives that were selected by the trustees to evaluate the superintendent on. Objective 2.1 is attract and hire highly effective personnel. Under that objective, the rating was 3.57, which in that little chart comes out to under the effective category. Now, because we're moving through this document, you probably won't remember what the rating scale said, but just FYI, effective breaks at 3.59. So if we are at a 3.57, and if it had been a 3.6, in other words, 0.03 of a point higher, we would have been into the highly effective category for this area. So you get what I'm saying. I think it's valuable because there's a certain spread here. This isn't sort of medium effective. This is really on the verge of moving to highly effective in this category. And by the way, I'll say if very high ratings in the majority, in fact, of these categories from what I typically see with superintendent evaluations. Okay, I would tell you that this is definitely was on the high end of evaluations. All right. Now, that's important for folks that are listening, because in the instructions that I sent to the trustees, and this is also included in the superintendent evaluation handbook, the processes that you adopted in October of 2022. I take about a paragraph or so, and I reminded you of that when you were doing your individual evaluations. Don't inflate grades. Grade inflation is alive and well in the universities. And I said, don't do that. And in fact, I wrote a sentence that said something like, you shouldn't be giving a 4 unless this person is so good at their job that they should hit the road, write a book, go on a speaking tour. This isn't the normal rating that you give. The normal rating is a 3. So only if someone's truly exemplary should you give them a 4. And I put that instruction in because I want to be sure that board members are being serious when they give a 4. We don't want to have an overinflated evaluation. Now, it's important for me to mention that because given those instructions, it turned out that there were an awful lot of trustees that rated the superintendent in this objective as a 4 to get a average rating of 3.57. So that's when I say this was a generally higher than average evaluation. That's why I say that partly. Objective, and that's objective number 2.3 says continuously increase retention and engagement of highly effective personnel. That rating came in as a 3.29, and that was solidly in the effective category. But more in the middle range, not on the edge moving to highly effective, but definitely very solid into the effective category. Goal number 3 was under family and community engagement. There was one objective selected by the board. Objective 3.1 says, strengthen inclusive two-way communication and community engagement in order to foster authentic relationships and recover trust. This rating was 3.86, which was in the highly effective area. And I'm probably overstating this, but because of the rating scale that you used, it's very difficult to get a highly effective rating here. You virtually, if you do the math, virtually every trustee has to give it a 4, give the superintendent a 4 to get close to that. So you get what I'm saying. So when you see that, that really means something, is all I'm trying to say. Goal number 4, continuous improvement is this goal. The board selected one objective to focus on. This was in objective 4.1 in business and finance. It says, to ensure that operational systems, central services, and finances are integrated and sustainably aligned to best support the needs of students, teachers, staff, schools, and departments. This average rating was 3.29, solidly in the effective category. Then on to the next page, goal number 5, safe and welcoming schools. The trustees selected 2 objectives to focus the evaluation on. Objective 5.1 says to provide and continuously improve a climate of belonging, self-worth, and justice amongst students, families, staff, and the community that is centered around an inclusive, collaborative, equitable, and engaging learning environment by providing equitable practices, strategies, and materials. This category had a 3.14 and was again in the center region of the effective rating category. The final objective that was evaluated was 5.2, which says, provide and continuously implement a district-wide comprehensive plan for school safety and crisis response, including training, facilities improvements, and the engagement of the community, schools, families, and students. This objective received a rating of 2.71, which was in the developing category on the high end, just like the first objective was. When you take all of the focus objectives together and just look at one final total overall rating, it comes out to 3.22, which is solidly in the effective category, a little bit on the high end, I would say, of the effective category. Okay. So now next, should I wait for questions, President Smith, on that before I go on, or?
No, I think it's fine if there's any questions about the methodology from the board. I know that my colleagues have received a lot of information from myself and Dr. Alsbury, and I will mention one thing that you didn't, which was that throughout the rating process, as each trustee had their own individual evaluation, Dr. Alsbury made himself available anytime, any way, so that we could have one-on-one counsel with him as we developed our own individual evaluations. So it is important for the public to know that Dr. Alsbury supported any of us that needed individual support and coaching through the process so that we could put together our evaluations.
Great, thank you. All right, so the next thing that in this evaluation is a section called commendations. So this is an opportunity for trustees to write commendations. In my instructions, again, I suggest you should write commendations only if they're truly commendations. If this is just a normal part of the job, it probably is not an area to write a commendation. A commendation means what the word means. This is something you truly were impressed by this, the superintendent, and you wanted to point it out in the evaluation. In this case, I have to tell you that this evaluation had the most commendations of any that I've seen. So
Ever?
yes. Now, I haven't worked with every board, right? I have a certain number that I've worked with, so there might be others out there like this, but for me anyway, this did turn out to have the most that I've ever seen. There are 7 trustees, and there were 85 commendations. That's a lot. All right. And so the next pages that you see, I think I needed 5 pages or something like that, or 5.5 to 6 pages just to fit all of the, so sorry about that. Sorry, trees, but that was a lot, and I think that means something. It means that it sends a message from the trustees as a whole group that that's very positive in the work that they felt that the superintendent did this past year. And by the way, all of those commendations are included in the evaluation. The last part of the evaluation is an opportunity for trustees to write what I call recommendations for growth. Now, in my instructions to the trustees, I provided an explanation of what a recommendation for growth would look like, and I even wrote an example sentence of here's what a recommendation of growth looks like, and here's what a statement that would not be a recommendation for growth, so you could see the difference between them. Because if you haven't written recommendations for growth, you know, it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do. The evaluation itself from the very beginning, and when you adopted this evaluation process, is focused on what we all, if you've seen the research, is called a growth mindset. It's a growth model. It's a continuous learning model. It's intended to help give direction for continued growth and improvement moving forward. And so that's why it's called recommendations for growth. Now, in a recommendation for growth, the statement requires a recommendation. So you actually have to recommend that the superintendent does something. And so I received 58 total from the 7 individual trustees. The total number of recommendations for growth there were 58. There were very few, and by my count, I had to make some adjustments or some reduction of I believe 7 of those recommendations of those 58. The reason that I made reductions is because there were multiple sentences that were given in those recommendations, and they didn't follow the guidelines for recommendations for growth. In other words, they were either editorializing or they were presenting data to justify the recommendation. So if a trustee said the superintendent should focus more on this, whatever it was, and then they went on for 3 more sentences saying, and here's why, and here's another reason why, and here's another reason why, we didn't include the reasons why. Okay, we're only including the recommendation for growth, right? But in every case, I was able, in every statement, I was able to glean from every statement from every trustee some recommendation. So in other words, there was no statement that you submitted to me, no recommendation for growth that I said, I'm not including that at all. There were none deleted, there were none removed, they were all there. Now what I did with those recommendations for growth at that point was I mixed them up, the 58. I removed any identification so that you would not know, the trustees would not know, who wrote that recommendation. There's a reason for that. I'll mention it in a second. That list of those recommendations for growth then went back to each individual trustee who, on their own, by themselves, looked at those recommendations, and they made comments about the recommendations. That is, they would rate, do I believe strongly that this recommendation for growth should be included in the evaluation? Do I agree? So it was a Likert scale. Do I agree it should be in the evaluation? There's 5 points. Am I neutral? I don't really care one way or the other. I don't have strong feelings either way. Do I disagree that this recommendation for growth should not be in the evaluation, or do I strongly disagree that it should not be in the evaluation? Now, after taking all of those, that input from the trustees, I'm able, in order to come to a consensus on what the whole board is feeling about each one of these statements, I can again translate that into numbers. And so numbers 1 through 5. And then I looked at any numerical number that exceeded the neutral rating. So if it was agree or strongly agree in that range, I agree or strongly agree that this statement should be included in the final evaluation draft. That statement was in fact included in the final evaluation draft. Okay. So in other words, as a board, you really came to consensus. So only statements where you as a group said, we're neutral on this, or we really don't think this should be included, those things didn't go into the... Now, in addition to the description I gave you about the ratings numbers, I did a similar analysis of the input from each of you across those recommendations for growth. And so I won't repeat all the statistic stuff I said before, but I looked also, is this a trend across board members? So not only does the number average work out, I looked and said, are the majority of the board members saying, yeah, this should be included? Because there's a possibility that you could get an average that said, no, it should not be included, only because a few trustees gave it a really poor rating and a few trustees gave it a really high rating. Once again, then the question comes, should it be included? So I looked across to see, did we have any of that going on? And it turns out that we did not. The numbers came out similar to yours. In the first part of the evaluation, there was agreement across the trustees. So when we came to a statement for recommendation for growth, over all of you, your numbers all went up together. Yes, this should be included, or they went down together. Now, individuals, some people overgrade, right? So some people just tended to give higher scores, and some other trustees tended to give lower scores. It's just a natural thing that we do. But and that's true for you as well. Some of you tend to give higher scores just all the time, and some tend to give lower. But the movement of all of you was consistent across the board, so it made it very clear that you as a group agreed, yep, these are the ones that really by consensus should be in this evaluation. So of those 58, we came up with, and I didn't count them before, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. 11 recommendations for growth. Objective 1.1, there was one recommendation for growth. Objective 2.1, there were 2 of them. Objective 3.1, there was 1. Objective 3.1, there were 2. Objective 4.1, there was 1. Objective 5.1, there were 2. And objective 5.2, there were 2. So there was 1 or 2 recommendations for growth that you all consistently supported for each of the objectives covered.
Dr. Ellsbury, can you also mention what we have in that top paragraph so that the board and
Yes.
the public are clear on what the recommendations are but are not?
Yes, thank you. And there's a couple of things that I want to comment on, and that's definitely one of them. So the statement at the top says the following are recommendations for growth compiled from the full board for the superintendent to consider and are not intended to be directives or requirements for inclusion in subsequent evaluations. Now, this is an important statement because, let's think about this for a second. There's 11 recommendations for growth here. And they're important. There's a reason that you gave those recommendations for growth. However, we need to be careful, because if you said these are requirements that we are going to evaluate you on in this next year's evaluation, well, what we've done, because you've already as a board selected the areas that you are going to evaluate the superintendent on for next year, there's already a grouping of those. And so one could argue, well, if you're saying, oh, now there's those, and we need to add 11 more. And so really, unless the board made that decision as a group, and we'll get to that because there is another step in this evaluation process, that's why the approach that this takes is these are recommendations, but they are not requirements. Now, there's another step in this evaluation process, and it's put in there intentionally. Midway through the process for this next year, which would land in February, this is called the mid-year formative check. Now, this mid-year formative check is a formal meeting, a work session. I believe that I'll probably be here with you, and happy to do that. This is an opportunity for 2 things. One, from the superintendent's side, the superintendent has the opportunity to say the evaluation categories that you approved, now we've already approved them for this next year, we're not going to be able to reach these because something outstanding and unexpected has happened in the district, like COVID. So big changes, the superintendent would bring that back to you and say, given these things that have happened, we may need to go back and revisit what strategic goals we can accomplish this year, or at least have an understanding that they may be more difficult to reach because of those things. In addition to that, it is an opportunity for the trustees to make any adjustments to the evaluation. Maybe, because it means what it says, it's a formative check. So maybe something has occurred during the first part of this school year, maybe with the data that's been coming in your board reports and these kinds of things, where you as a board, you know, I think there's an area that the community is really concerned about. We didn't realize they were really concerned about it. Now we realize they are, and I think we need to add that to the evaluation. We need to take a look at that this year, even though we didn't put it in earlier. So there is that opportunity, and obviously that would be a vote by the full board would have to agree that that would be an addition. So that's a possibility, and it's also possible that there might be additional data that one could add. So sometimes there's more data available. There's a new assessment that's now available where the board may say, is it possible to include this additional piece of data to support the evaluation for this year? That's the opportunity for that as well, okay? Make sense? So that's why this statement is what it is, because without it, you would leave with possibly the misunderstanding that we're now going to require this and actually rate you on these 11 additional things in next year's evaluation. Does it make sense? Okay. Now, the second thing, yeah.
One moment. Vice President Nicolette has a question.
Thank you, President. That's very important information, at least for me. And my question surrounding that is, yes, these are recommendations, and I know that our superintendent will take them to heart.
Of course.
Because they're important. What would you suggest as a board we do to be provided regular updates? And again, not in a requirement stance, but in our superintendent is extremely busy, and we couldn't possibly, nor do I want to know everything that she does. So for some kind of updates that relate to this important information and valuable work, what would you recommend that we to continue?
Well, I think that again, a good administrator, and you have a good administrator here, that's what this evaluation says. They're going to continue to bring you information in the regular reports that would likely shed light on all of these areas. These are normal areas that you're receiving data on now, and you'll be continuing to receive data on it. Even though it's not a focus, and remember we said this before for both this year and this last year and then the upcoming year, remember we said when it was the very difficult job of trying to whittle down which strategic areas are we going to focus on for our evaluation, and the question came up then, kind of, I think, similar. We come about it from two different angles, but it's a similar question is, well, what about the other areas? Does that mean that our superintendent's not going to do anything with the rest of the strategic goals that we're not focusing on? Does that mean that we're never going to see any data on the rest of the strategic goals other than the ones that we're focusing on? And I think we all said, and the superintendent said, no, you are going to see data on all of these, and you are going to will be continuing to work on all of these. It just means that the focus for the evaluation explicitly will be focused on a few. But you should, I would imagine that you'll still be receiving information about these. Now, however, let me just play both sides of this. So remember balance, right? Balance, balance. When we get, as we go through the year, Trustee Nicolette and any of the trustees, this is where that formative mid-year check comes in. So if you get through the year, or into up to February, right, and we have that session, and you say, you know what, we've had zero, we'll just pick on one, attract and hire effective personnel. We've had no evidence, no information about how our personnel program is going, and it looks like there's problems in that area, and therefore I want to make a recommendation that perhaps that should be added to this year's evaluation. That's the opportunity for you to do that. So playing devil's advocate, that would be the opportunity for you to do it. I believe that that is highly unlikely that that's going to occur, because the plan, and I see Superintendent Enfield shaking her head, yeah, the plan is that you will continue to receive information on personnel and hiring and diversity in your hiring and all the things that you said are important to you. You're going to continue to have that information. So I would say it's highly unlikely that you would do that. But if the question is, do we have an opportunity in case there is a real concern that's not in the evaluation to add something? The answer is yes. And it's during that formative time.
And on that note, and just so everyone knows, this is an item for action, so we will have public comment shortly. So I think that this is a good breaking point to actually hear from Dr. Enfield herself on this evaluation. All the trustees will have an opportunity to make some comment, and then we'll go to public comment before we move to action. But I think the first person that we should hear, and of course also in follow-up to Vice President Nicolette, is Dr. Enfield herself.
Thank you, President Smith, and thank you, Dr. Ellsbury. Appreciate your partnership in this process. And I'll start by saying I want to thank our trustees for the time and attention you gave to this. You are busy people, and this was a time-consuming endeavor, and I appreciate that. I know you brought a lot of thought and care and wisdom to the process, and I'm grateful. I'm especially grateful to President Smith, who really did yeoman's work in leading this process and shepherding us along to where we are today. So thank you. I appreciate that. You know, I'll start by saying that, and you've heard me say it before, leadership is a team sport. And so any commendations I accept on behalf of the wonderful people with whom I work, some of whom are in the room right now. And you know, any deficiencies or areas for growth I own as the leader of this system. And I was heartened in reading the recommendations for growth that there was such alignment with our strategic plan. So, you know, what I would say is I wouldn't expect to be out to you on the specifics of these recommendations, but rather in context, Vice President Nicolette, of the strategic plan work that we're doing, if that makes sense. And we can have follow-up conversation around that. But, you know, I think also a big part of leadership is modeling. And I think it's really important to model giving feedback and accepting feedback. I like to do that for my team. And so, to be honest, when President Smith and Dr. Ellsbury and I were preparing, President Smith, and they really wanted to go over the commendations, like, no, let's skip that. Let's get to the areas for growth. I want meaningful feedback, right? And so I appreciate this, and I will be sharing this with my team as well, and figuring out which ones we think are really actionable and we want to fold in, and how we will do that. So I just want to make that public commitment to you. I'm not just going to go and recycle this and say thanks very much. But I will also just end with, because I want to turn it over to the trustees, that you know, it has been I guess we're over a year now. We're 15 months in. It's been a remarkable year plus, and I will just say that, as you've heard me say, we are a district on the rise, and I think we all feel that, and we know we have lots of work to do. You know, I will say that areas where we're developing as a system, right? We are a work in progress, but what I commit to you, what I commit to my colleagues, to our students, staff, families, community, is that I will continue to show up every day, do the job to the best of my ability, and always do it from the stance of a learner and someone who can always be better. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Enfield. And now I'd like to give all the trustees a brief opportunity to weigh in with their thoughts or any questions. Then we will go to public comment, and we'll bring it back to this body for deliberation, because this is an action item, which means that the rubber meets the road, and we will be adopting this. And, you know, if we add anything to it or adopt it as is. But of course, Dr. Ellsbury, I'd like to say thank you for that thorough review of this process, because this was a very thorough and exhaustive process. It was very data focused, it was very objective, and it's something that we took very seriously over a long period of time. So with that said, I will go ahead and start and say that I also agree that this is a remarkable year one evaluation from a remarkable superintendent. When I look at the pure impact in one single year that has happened within this organization, I can only imagine the things that are to come. And so things for me that immediately come to mind are the adoption of paper as a tutoring tool for 6th grade to 12th grade, the elimination of a waiting period for benefits for our staff, a willingness to work with our labor associations in a way that we've never done before, the adoption of the Centegix security system that allows any member of our staff to have access to an immediate response for safety needs, among many, many other things. When I do look at areas like we have identified for developing, like Dr. Enfield said, these are areas that do take time for development. So when I look at the academics, when I look at our safety, which is something that we elevated in our new strategic plan, these are goals that we achieve over the course of years. And Dr. Enfield has also talked very openly about change in large academic settings taking 3-4 years. And we've begun that path now. Yep, 3 to 5, 3 to 5. So that's where I will leave it now. I do have some things that I'll mention after public comment, because one of the things I look at as a corporate professional is I'm always looking for opportunities where our corporate world may have good practices that we may want to pull in to government entities as well, because there are good learnings that go both ways. I will mention that on the other side of public comment, but I wanted everyone to know how I felt about this, and then also my heartfelt appreciation for, in my estimation, an incredibly strong year one. So now I will open it up to my other colleagues. I know Colleen, Trustee Westlake had her light on first, so I will let you go first. Again, we'll go around briefly, and then we'll go to public comment.
Thank you, President Smith, and thank you, Dr. Alsbury. Thank you for letting me go so I wouldn't forget what I was going to say. But it was more on what Trustee Nicolette said. I just want to throw this out there because I think the superintendent's highlight, I enjoy reading those because it keeps me apprised of how hardworking our superintendent actually is and what she's actually doing out there in the community and the schools. And I find that in the highlights, I'm seeing a lot of these recommendations for growth, you know, reaching out to the community, visiting this school and doing this at this school and this group. It's all tying into this. So I think going back now to President Smith, we are evolving, but I'm seeing a lot of this in the highlights already transpiring. And then the only other thing I just wanted to comment on, this was an amazing opportunity just for myself. It was very insightful, and I think this actually helped me to and to kind of align what as a board we feel is important. And it's really, really great to hear that we're kind of all on the same page, because that's going to help the process moving forward, I think, much, much easier and much quicker. But I say thank you for this process, and also it's like I said, I mean, I'm actually seeing this going on already in the highlights. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam President. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna give you a short one here, really quick. I want to first thank our president for helping us get through this, and she was very helpful, very persuasive and strong, so that was good. I appreciate that. We all have busy schedules. The thing I want to share, say directly to Dr. Enfield is leadership for me is a very important quality, and I'm just going to give you one statement, something that I've observed from you. No matter how anecdotal a comment may be, what I've noticed and I've observed is that anything you hear, even if it's not even said to you directly, you immediately act. And I've seen the change made or the action that needed to be taken. And sometimes we don't even tell you directly, oh, I need X, but I've seen it. And I just want to tell you that I appreciate that, because that's how you do business, and I'm glad that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, I mean, I just really want to echo a lot of things to Dr. Infield that our president has spoken, and I just can't stress enough that, you know, the community sees where our district was 2.5 years ago and where it is today, and it is leaps and bounds from where we were before. The community engagement, going to schools and seeing the morale, it's day and night. So it's really impressive, the work that's been done. And I appreciate how our time for 20 events, things of those natures, you're standing there with us, with the majority of this board, and it's very, very appreciative. So, and I agree that the areas for improvement, you said it best, is aligned with our strategic plan, and I'm excited to be on this road, and can't wait to see how this next year goes with you. So, and thank you. You know, I say it as a parent and as a resident of this community, that thank you for your leadership in this district.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I want to compliment you as well. This was a daunting task, and I appreciate the direction you provided. I think you did a fantastic job, particularly for your first year as serving as president. So I do have a question, and then I'm going to chime in because I think our superintendent is phenomenal as well. But I do have a question, and it may seem a little critical. It's not intended to be. We talked a lot about accommodations, over 80 accommodations that were all placed on the record, and then there were 50-plus areas of improvement. Kind of weeded those out. We got input. I'm just wondering why we didn't do the same process for the areas of growth for the accommodations, because there were some, for instance, areas of growth that I had on there that didn't make it to the final, whereas all of my accommodations made it on the final. And again, it's not intended to be critical. I just think it's transparency. I think it's important to identify that.
No, it's a good question, and it is done intentionally. In my way of thinking, commendations are commendations. So there's no need to be efficient and like you could have themed the commendations. You know, you could have merged because some of the commendations were saying the same things. But when you give somebody compliments, you just give them compliments. There's no argument to really reduce them. When it comes to recommendations, however, for growth, the challenge is that we want to give the superintendent clear direction from the board as a whole, rather than give the superintendent 58 different directions or recommendations for growth that could potentially be contradictory. And so in the process of creating a single evaluation that really is speaking as a whole board rather than 7 individual board members, that's why we have the procedure where we have the reduction or the ratings rather of the comments. Now, part of that is also done though to honor everyone's voice. The other methods that I've seen used with this would be, again, the typical, you get in a room, you all share individual things, and then maybe you vote on what areas of growth should be included in evaluation. That would be a very long, protracted process, first of all. Okay. It's very difficult to come to consensus around that. But it also actually minimizes individual voice in the sense that when I can send out and let each of you in the privacy of your own home write anything you want for recommendations for growth, there's no stifling of your voice. So everybody gets to say what everybody is feeling without having to compromise or feel pressure to, go along with the rest of the board members. So I think that's an important step in allowing for that, but then it's equally important after everybody has voiced their opinions to say, Trustee Mayberry thinks this, what does the rest of the board think? And it is important if the rest of the board is saying, yeah, I didn't really see that. I don't think that was an area of growth. Then as a whole board, we need to give a clear message to the superintendent. And that's what this process does. So she knows what to do, and she doesn't have contradicting direction.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's a fundamental difference between commendations and areas of improvement, and I get that, and that's sort of what I expected, and I'm really glad that there weren't any outliers in this process. So, and you know, I think you started your presentation earlier when you mentioned the word journey. You know, this has been a journey. It's been a journey for all of us, I think. None of us really knew. Well, none of us knew anybody. This is a board that likes each other. We get along. You know, we give each other high fives. We hug each other. It's really a team of 8 when we include the superintendent. And I know we went through this national process, and Dr. Enfield was before us. She was my first choice. I didn't have a second. My biggest concern was, my gosh, what happens if we don't get Dr. Enfield? You know, we start the process over. I honestly didn't have a second. The president noted a number of positive points. I think people in our community really, as somebody that's been in the public sector my entire career, this is a very complex organization. The superintendent is not only has oversight of you know, the academic piece, which is what we all think about, but also our infrastructure, our public safety, social services, you know, major special events. This is a big job. It is the scope of you know, a county manager or a city manager, only with, you know, a bit of a different twist, and that is, you know, embracing and ensuring that our young learners, who are going to be the future of our communities, our state and the nation, are ready to lead and make a difference in this democracy that we have. So she's, you know, the right person for the right job right now, and I'm delighted to serve alongside her and all other members of this board. So she has my full support. So thank you for your continued dedication and the work that you're doing.
Trustee Church, we want to make sure to get your voice in this.
Thank you very much. Thank you. First of all, when people ask me about the superintendent, I tell everybody that she's brilliant. She hit the ground running. I rated her extremely highly in a number of areas. And so I make that clear to everybody. And as Dr. Ellsbury said, we were pretty consistent in our ratings. However, here's the problem, and here's the elephant in the room. Goal 1, the academic growth, and Goal 5, the safe schools. Those continue to be a problem. And I recognize all the good things that President Smith mentioned, that she's accomplished. But I still, as a very logical person, I have to look at the stats. I have to look at the goals that were set and the stats for this past year. I recognize again that it's the first year. She hit the ground running, and she made major improvements in the other goal areas that I rated very highly. However, that said, in my heart, I can't rate any higher at most than developing in those 2 areas. That's not a fail. That's not, oh my God, you're going to be terminated. It's just developing. It is exactly what it says. And so in spite of all those good things, I look at the fact that we've got a serious violence problem internally in the schools. And I get emails every single day on that. And yeah, we did the discipline manual. Yeah, we've got locks on we've done all that stuff. But the fact is the problem remains. And that's why it's developing. In terms of the academic growth, the stats just came out. And the superintendent said it. She owns it. She admits she owns it. And again, she's new, is turning an aircraft carrier around, but we were down in every category: ACT, S-scores, 5-star school ratings, violence in the schools. So I have to rate her as developing in those 2 areas. And I have a real concern with voting for anything that doesn't. I really want to see, again, my logical brain, very specific goals, not insurmountable. And this is just for example. This is not set in stone. I'm just using these as an example. Increase ACT scores from 17.1 to 17.4. Decrease the number of 1-star schools by 10%. Again, nothing that's not insurmountable. high school math, increase proficiency from 22% proficient to 25% proficient. I mean, that's hardly anything to be proud of that we're 25% proficient, but again, I think that's a very reasonable goal for next year. Violent events in school decreased 7418 to 7100 in the first 110 days of school, because those are the most recent ones I've got. I tried to get better ones and was unsuccessful. Absenteeism, the state says we're at 31%, WCSD says we're at 28%. So let's increase that, decrease chronic absenteeism to 25%. Not insurmountable. Anyway, those are the way my brain works and how I interpret it. Very high in the other areas. It's not, she has my support. Can I make it more clear than that? She has my support to continue, but I have to rate helping in those two areas. So I really appreciate your allowing me the time to chime in on that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I hear what my colleague is saying, Trustee Church, and I think we can get there with looking at numbers. I have no doubt that that's already occurring. I do have a question about if the strategic plan, the new one that is so exciting that we currently have, will that at all play a role in our formative work in February?
If you don't mind, it absolutely will. And this is a wonderful point of clarification. These goals that we are evaluating Dr. Enfield on for the 2022 school year that ended in June of 2023 were goals based on our previous strategic plan, which was the strategic plan in place at the time. When we met as a body in June of 2023 to set the superintendent's goals for this school year that we are in now, we did so based on the current strategic plan, which we had also just ratified. And so the answer would be yes. And of course, I want to hear from Dr. Alsbury, but I do want to point out that these goals in this last year was the end point of a previous chapter, if you will. And this current school year that we're in now, year 2 with Dr. Enfield, is the beginning of a new chapter that we have set forth through the updated strategic plan.
I don't think I have anything to add. That's very well said, President Smith. Yeah, the answer is yes.
Do you have anything else? All right, and so now is a great opportunity for public comment. JJ?
Gordon Gassage.
For the record, I'm Gordon Gossage from Regenesis Reno, and just to join in, I really want to commend you, Dr. Enfield, in particular for the rating on family and community engagement. 3.86 is quite amazing. And in my experience working with CEOs, one of the things I always try to do is work with the strengths. So whatever the strengths are, that she had, I would work as hard as I could to do more of that. You know, you're great at that, let's do more of that. And in the objective 3.1, the two-way communication, that's so important in both directions. And I would like to commend one of your team members, Michelle Anderson, since she has a lot to do with community engagement. You obviously worked with her, and that's great. I also think there's a gigantic opportunity with our top tech employers. I entered the software and data industry in 1977, so I've watched it change. And Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and I were all born in the same year. So that was the year we all turned 22. They did a little better than me, but there we go. And there are really two opportunities. I think one is fairly obvious, and that is that they can provide money. And I believe they could provide a lot more money. I think it's time to open the Google wallet, as we say. And these companies globally have amazing amounts of cash and profits. Let's, put them in front of them some prospectuses of how they get help. But even more important than money, I think we should get some of the tech employees who have kids in the schools to get more involved in the schools. And a lot of them are new, as you know, they've come from other states. And, really ask them to use their talents to help us out. The Education Alliance, I'm just getting used to what they do. I think it is an amazing opportunity. Let's do more with them. And I also, finally think sometimes it's difficult to ask people, this is what I want from you. But I think third parties, and I'm volunteering for that, third parties can help to ask for you. And then they can also be frank and say, well, we can't do that, or, we could. So, in closing, I really hope to learn more about what all of you guys do, and I really hope to help. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gosich.
Annie Zucker.
Hi, Ms. Zucker. Welcome.
For the record, my name is Annie Zucker. I am a commissioner of the Safe and Healthy Schools Commission, but I am here today to speak as a parent of Washoe County students, 2 of them, and a community volunteer. I'm here to thank Superintendent Dr. Enfield for her leadership and commitment to our community engagement during her first year as superintendent. I would also like to thank the Board of Trustees for supporting Dr. Enfield as she engages with our community to best understand the needs of our students and the resources available to them. If I can say one thing about my observation and experience with Dr. Enfield, it is that she shows up. She shows up for critical community conversations. She shows up to educate and engage with community leaders. She shows up to share the Washoe County School District strategy and vision. And she shows up to listen to parents. Most importantly, she shows up for our students every day. Dr. Enfield is a true professional whose network reaches far beyond Washoe County and leads to new ideas, new resources, and new programs to support our students. I'd like to thank you again for your steadfast commitment to our community and the future Washoe County School District.
Thank you so much.
The board received emails from Chris Dieter, Taylor Adams, Allison and Jeff Gorlick, Parr and Jill Tolles, and Brian Sandoval.
Thank you very much. So we'll bring it back here. So this is, again, an item for action. I can tell everyone here personally that I do support the evaluation as it is. I think that this is a good, comprehensive capture of all of our thoughts together as one governing body. I did promise that I was going to mention something that I have already brought up with Dr. Enfield. When I look at my decades of experience on the corporate leadership side, although we don't often make connections between government or even nonprofit, but there are some very good things that our corporate entities do. And one of those things that I have seen be very powerful is something called a 360 executive leadership review. And I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with what that is, but an executive 360 leadership review refers to 360 degrees around a leader. And what these reviews look like is they are completely anonymous. They evaluate a leader based on several different aspects of leadership and provide that leader with confidential, private, and fully anonymous feedback from the people that are reporting to them. Now, we would say, of course, leaders have great relationships and open lines of communication with everyone that they work with, but a 360 review allows an opportunity for a leader to get feedback that person not entirely feel comfortable sharing or may go deeper into certain areas of individual growth. I have seen these be very powerful and very effective in corporate environments, and they are a healthy sign of governance within corporations. These are not used when there is an issue. These are used proactively in the way that we create those open lines of communication to avoid issues. So again, I can't stress enough that this is a powerful and proactive tool that I have seen great success with in organizations that I've worked with. Dr. Enfield and I have already discussed this, but I also wanted to invite Dr. Alsbury because this is something that I had discussed with him before as an idea. And the reason why I brought it up is because we are not a for-profit company or corporation. So I'm very mindful when I have ideas to pull in those practices because I do understand that fundamentally a school district is different than an international corporation, but that doesn't mean that we can't learn a few things from them. Dr. Alsbury.
Oh, thank you. So let me shed a little history on this. Because the education field did pick up on 360-degree evaluation. In fact, as a brand new professor, 23 years ago, I went to Iowa State University, and in the field of education, who was called the father, and he was a father, so Dr. Dick Manat actually began an international research study that reached out nationally to introduce and encourage the use of 360-degree evaluations amongst administrators across the country. And he was a professor there at Iowa State University when I arrived and got to know him. It was a big deal. So it's not just in the field, just to say that, it's not just in the field of business, but that absolutely has been picked up on. And that is a normal and regular thing that that administrators use, that tool. It's a very commonly used tool. And so there would be support in terms of the academy and research as well for the use of that kind of a tool.
Thank you, Dr. Alsbury. Thank you, President Smith. Yes, President Smith and I were, I think, having some mind-reading moments because I do see great value in it, not just for me, but for my entire executive leadership team, who I think would benefit from participating in that as well. But the other thing I would like to add as well, which was a very powerful thing we did in my former district, our culture and climate survey that we would give to staff, families, everyone, listed questions specific to the superintendent and the strategic plan, which gave us data over time. So, questions around the superintendent is accessible and available to me. But then what was really, really powerful, and this is what I'm going to talk to Joe Ernst about, is how can we get some staff and community feedback in climate survey in addition to a 360 that would provide the trustees and me with really solid information on how we're doing. And I'll just give one really specific, I'm sorry if this is a bird walk, you can kick me if I'm.
No, this is your moment.
Okay, so I'll never forget that one of the questions was, around superintendent vision, but the question around, I know the goals in the strategic plan. The next question was, I support the goals in the strategic plan. And the third one was, I have the resources to implement the goals in the strategic plan. And that third one was really telling, right? Because there was tremendous support for the goals. But when we saw a lower percentage that our staff didn't have the resources to do it, that was really good. So I just give that as an example. I think that anytime we can bring in more data, more feedback, more observation, both from within the system and from outside the system, we're better off. So I'm in full support.
Thank you. Dr. Nicolette, I saw your light on, and then I know that we've all had the opportunity to speak, and I will just orient my colleagues towards the motion that you see here before you, because this is going to be an item for action. Dr. Nicolette.
Well, I am ready to make a motion after what we just discussed about a deeper dive, if you will, into our superintendent's professional work, which is marvelous. I will try it because I think I want to add something. I move that the Board of Trustees accepts and approves the final performance evaluation for Dr. Susan Enfield, to include continuing to seek the input from Washoe County School District employees and, as appropriate, community members. It needs a little Help me out.
It's not that bad. I mean, that's a motion.
So is that a B minus, or?
Before we talk about it, I need a second, or it dies, and then we work on it, and then we bring it back.
It's a 2.81.
I don't think so. I will try.
JJ's going to give it a shot.
JJ's got it. Thank you.
I move that the Board of Trustees accepts and approves the final performance evaluation for Dr. Susan Enfield to include continuing to seek input from Washoe County School District employees and, where appropriate, community members.
That's good.
I second it.
You did a good job. All right. So we have a motion by Vice President Nicolette. We have a second by Trustee Westlake. Seeing no hands. Oh, we do have a hand. Okay. I was looking for like the little cartoon hand.
I was trying to find it.
That's okay. Trustee Church.
Just a quick comment. Again, I support the superintendent's continued service to the community and applaud all the wonderful things she's done. I just kind of ask trustees and the community, our new stats are going to come out September of 2024. Mark your tickle file. I'm expecting great improvement. So I just want to put that on the table that whichever way I vote, that we've got to start looking at the stats and whether or not we improve. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, I just wanted a quick comment before we go for the vote. I do have faith that the areas that are developing our academic growth will improve under this leadership and with the commitment of our educators. And speaking for item number 5, safe and welcoming schools. I know we're on the brink of looking for a brand new police chief, so I'm looking forward to seeing the fresh look, coming, where that chief comes from. So I have faith that this will improve. And again, I look forward to next year and see where we're at.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I think the motion is fine. I honestly, I'm be happy with just accepting the report. I mean, I think she's going to continue to reach out to the community and seek input from her staff and that. So I'm not sure how necessary that really needs to be. But, I would I don't know if this is an area of growth or if it's a commentary, maybe somewhere in the middle. But I do hope the superintendent, she talks fast and she operates fast. So I would hope that going forward in the next 12 months, maybe you can slow down just a little bit. Because sometimes even when I'm with you, I feel like I'm rushed. That's not a criticism, but anyway, just wanted to share the anecdote with you. Thank you.
You are not alone, Trustee Mayberry, nor is that the first time I have heard that comment. I have heard that comment throughout my career as an educator, I think as a teacher and then as an administrator and now as a superintendent. And I do take it to heart. You always have to make sure that the people you're working with are with you. So communicating, checking in with people, putting in systems in place so that I am able to check in with staff. And I want to be clear that I'm mindful, and this is what I always say, and you've heard me say it. I'm only going as fast as our children need me to go, which means I'm never going fast enough because our kids don't get a do-over. And I get up every day with a mission in my bones to do better by our kids. And that's the only impetus. But Dr. Dye has, sometimes I can be slowed down. So I welcome that at the appropriate moment. So thank you.
Thank you, President Smith. I just want to, I understand what Trustee Mayberry said. I think we all know the direction we want to go and what the community expects of us. I do like what Trustee Nicolette added, though, because we're talking the talk, and I said this earlier today, we're talking the talk, but it's important to walk the walk and put it down in paper so we're sending a clear message to our community that we are constantly seeking more information, more input. So I think that is important. I think that's important that it's included so that the community understands fully well the direction we intend to go. So, thank you.
All right. Seeing no other lights on, we'll go ahead and move to a vote. We have a motion by Vice President Dr. Diane Nicolette, seconded by Trustee Colleen Westlake. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay.
For the reasons stated, nay.
Motion carries 6-1. Thank you so much for your year, Dr. Enfield. We appreciate you. Okay, so that closes item 2.01 and then brings us to our section 3, our closing public comment, item 3.01. JJ, do we have any closing public comment?
We do.
All right. And now we move on to item 3.02, adjourning the meeting. 12:38 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone.